Verla H. Wagoner served in the Women's Army Corps January 12, 1944 through December 17, 1945. This is August 26, 2003 at 12:20 p.m. at the Stratton VA Medical Center in Albany, New York. The interview is being conducted by Kenneth and June Hunter. What is your full name and when and where were you born?
Well, my full name is Verla H. Wagoner. My maiden name was Duncan. And I was born Egan, little town by the name of Egan, South Dakota. And I'm the second oldest of 6 children. And my father was a farmer. I was born and brought up on a farm. And of course, my father fed cattle. And we owned the farm. And we all, the 6 children, all went to the same school and graduated from the Egan High School.
So before you entered the military, what did you do?
Well, before I went in the military, I worked in the county farm, some farm.
Like Farm Bureau or Cooperative Extension? Or?
Well, it was something to do with the farms. And then from there I went to Pierce, South Dakota and worked in the state treasurer's office. There was a girl from Egan that had the job and they wanted to replace her with another one from Moody County. So they called on me to see if I'd go, so I had to go up to the Flandreau, that's a county seat, and take a shorthand test so they could write a recommendation for me. So I went to Pierre and I worked there in the state treasurer's office until I went into service. And there I had to balance checks and run the posting machine. And just before I left, I had to do the bookkeeping machine, which I didn't enjoy as much as the posting machine. So then from there I went into to the service. And it was
Where did you enter the service?
Well, I signed up in Sioux Falls. I went to Sioux Falls and signed up for an air-WAC. And then that was the first part of December, I guess, and I didn't go into service until January after Christmas. They let me stay home till after Christmas.
Why did you enlist in the service? What?
Well, the reason I enlisted, I met somebody from Albany, and we had a base out there at Pierre with the service people. And also I had my oldest brother had gone in, and I had a cousin that went in, and I thought maybe that would be an experience. I'd travel around and maybe go overseas and see a foreign country. And so I just signed up to go in the Air Force, because this fellow that I met in Pierre, he was in the Air Force. So I thought that would be something to be around the planes, be more exciting than just be at an Army base. And I took the basic in Des Moines, Iowa, and the place there in Des Moines was a cavalry base, and the commanding officer, he was the commanding officer when it was a cavalry base, I'm quite sure it was, and so he was our commander of the base, yeah. And on inspections, he always wore white gloves, and they always said if you didn't clean up your spot or something, he'd take his hands and wipe over the bed or the window or something. And if it was dirty, he'd leave his gloves, but I never seen a white pair of gloves left in our barracks. But one cold January day, we were having an inspection, and the commander of the post, he stood in front of me and he said, "It's cold out." And I said, "Yes." He says something about washing the window, and I says, "Yes, sir." Of course, we never touched the window that day because it was too cold to wash. And then we got orders to, there was another girl that went with me at the time that I went to Des Moines. And we were out in the parade ground, we had to parade. And if I remember right, I think that's where we had to put on gas masks and go through a building where the gas was. And then from Des Moines, I was shipped out to Fort Monroe, Virginia. And that was, I enjoyed that place, only it wasn't an air base. And there we had, at Fort Monroe, that was a tactics school. It was all officers. Of course, there was a lot of non-officers. And but it was a classroom where they studied tactics, and it was all officers. And there was just one other WAC and I that worked in the classroom. And she would always ran the movie machine when they showed pictures and all, and I always hand out the tests and collected them and the exams they took. And when they took field trips, we always went on the field trips. Of course, the non-com men would say, we're going to have lunch with us, but it had to be that we always had to eat with the officers. And Fort Monroe was kind of an interesting place because when you go into the fort, you had to go over a little bridge. There was water all around it. And we had our own mess hall where the women, there was 2 or 3 women that did their cooking. And there, well, we was always on duty during the day or night, walking our beat. And the night that I and another girl was out walking on the post, it was a cold, windy night. And seems like all the garbage cans and the covers were rolling all over and making noise. But we were never stopped by any of the MPs or anything. Some of the girls were. And then we used to walk up along the beach there at Fort Monroe. And one day I decided that I still wanted to be on an air base. So I wrote back to Sioux Falls to the recruiting office. And next thing I know, I got a letter. They would check into it why I wasn't sent to a base. And one day the commanding officer come in and she says, Private Duncan, do you know you have to go through channels? I says, yes, ma'am. So I got my orders and they sent me to Bowling Field, Washington, D.C. So I was at Bowling Field until I got out of service. And from Fort Monroe, the other girls were sent. I think I was the only one from there that was sent to Bowling Field because I was sent out before the others. And one Sunday at Fort Monroe, the base got food poisoned by Boston cream pie. And we didn't, because we did, as I said before, the women did our cooking. We had our own mess hall and everything. And they called the commander to see if some of us girls would come down to the hospital to help out. So I volunteered, and several of the others did too. And they were so sick, they had them on stretchers, they had them on the operating tables, everything. And the doctor would go along and put a cross on their forehead, and they could have a drink of water. They were calling for water, but we couldn't give it to them unless the doctor had put a cross on their forehead, and then they could have a drink of water. And they were so sick to their stomach. And the worst ones they took out to another hospital. I don't know whether it's one at Fort Monroe or just outside of there or someplace, but they took the worst ones to another hospital. But that was about the worst thing I'd ever seen while I was in the service. Well, then I got to Bowling Field, and let's see. Well, no, going back to Fort Monroe with this tactics school, we had to go on night maneuvers too with the officers. And the officers were given compasses to find their way back. And I don't know just where they stationed the other girls or some other men, but they stationed me on a highway. And we were told that when the officers come with their compasses to tell them which way to go because they were to meet at a certain area. So while I was standing on the highway, this truckload of service people come. Well, they happened to be a load of sailors. And they slowed up and stopped. And of course they were talking to themselves and laughing and all. And just then the officer that was near me was right there. And of course he didn't stand on the road with me when anybody come up, but he was right within walking distance of me. And he wanted to know, he says, "You all right?" And I said, "Yes." Well, when the sailors seen the officers, they took off then down the road. And so I think that's about all from Fort Monroe. And then when I got to Bowling Field, that was, well, I did office work there. It was in, it was in supplies that I was. And I used to go up to Fort Myers with them when they got supplies. And then, of course, we was always out in the parade ground. And I think it was Bowling Field at night. We'd get ready for bed. And somebody decided they wanted to go out and have something to eat. So we'd roll up our pajama legs and put on our coats, and away we'd go to the restaurants. I didn't do that too much, though. But I did a couple times go with the girls. And then we had one of the girls that worked down to where the planes were, and she'd always let us know when a plane was taken off for after they repair them. So we'd go down, we'd get permission from the commanding officer, and we'd go down and get on the plane and go up when they tested the plane after they worked on them. So I guess we were asking for too many, so the commanding officer gave us all a ticket to have, so anytime there was a plane we could go up on them. And the pilots used to let us sit up in the seat, you know, we'd walk back and forth, and it was something different. And then let's see, well, I was at Bowling Field. There was a 1st Air Force Base and 2nd Air Force Base, and I was at the 1st Air Force Base. But one of the girls, she knew a cook down at the 2nd, and they were open. Their mess hall was open. We used to go down and get something to eat down there. And also, I think it was Bowling Field, or sometimes they would give us chicken and we'd take it back to the barracks and eat it. And then
were you ever introduced to Spam?
I don't believe so. I don't remember having it in the service. I remember on every table we had a jar of grape jelly on every table. There was always grape jelly on the table. I suppose if you didn't like the meal, you could have bread and grape jelly.
And peanut butter.
And peanut butter was the other thing. Peanut butter and grape jelly. And we had, I think it was carrots. We had carrots. And when I go home, my mother would have carrots, and I'd say, "Oh, that's all we have in the service is carrots this and carrots that." And then when I was at Bowling Field, I used to come up to Albany, get a weekend. Well, I could get a pass to New York. That was as far as I'd go. But then the fellow that gave me the passes, he'd make out one from New York to Albany. So I used to come up to Albany, because this fellow that I met in Pier, his folks lived in Albany, and they wanted me to, I'm getting ahead of myself. So, well, it was while I was working in Pier, this fellow that I met was, had gone overseas, and he was missing in action when I got a call one night. And it was like a sense premonition or something. And I sat up in bed and it says, New York calling. And then the next night I got a telephone call from his brother-in-law that he was missing in action. So that's one reason, besides my brother being in, that I went in service. And so then I had a vacation there when I was still working before I went into service. And I came to Albany to meet his folks, his mother, and I wrote and told her what I was going to have on and everything. And his mother and sister met me at the train depot. And so I was here for a week to visit her and everything. And they never, so then when I got to Bowling Field, then I used to come up weekends and visit with them. And I got to know them real well and everything. And at Bowling Field, let's see, what's some of the things? Well, I was stationed at Bowling Field when President Roosevelt died. And I know we went into Washington that night and drove down by the White House, but it was all dark. And we used to go into the USO places there in Washington. And
Did Washington, D.C. have any special decorations up in honor of Roosevelt?
I don't recall anything. It was dark around the White House and all. And then we'd always go sightseeing. And we went out to, what was that one place?
Arlington.
Oh, we went to Arlington Cemetery, and we used to go out to Washington's home there,
Mount Vernon.
Mount Vernon. And I went to a picnic one time while I was stationed in Washington, and it was the senators and representatives from South Dakota. They had a picnic for all the service people from South Dakota. And I went to that. Of course, a lot of them I knew working in here. And then going back to
Virginia.
Yeah, to Virginia there.
Fort Monroe.
Why, I think it was Wool Island out from there. So they took us out there one time to a party. They took us by boat, and come to find out we were the first women that was ever on that island. And we enjoyed it, and then they had dancing and refreshments for us and all, and then they took us back. Of course, whoever piloted the boat, and it was all women on the boat there, and they took us over. And what else was there?
Were there a lot of women in that group stationed?
There was at Bowling Field. There wasn't too many at Fort Monroe.
What kind of barracks facilities did you have?
Well,
what
the
what
barracks
about
was
your
just like the
uniform?
men's barracks.
You had your own separate place in the barracks?
Yeah. Well, the beds were all lined up just like the men's. Yeah. And of course the girls that were the sergeants of the barracks or something, they had their own little room. Yeah. And of course they were always seeing that we were in bed when it was time and all. And I don't know, we used to go into Washington and go to different things. I think it was, is it Dunbark and Oaks? Well, we used to go out there. I think they had, was it Churchill or somebody met there or something? We went out by that. We had to look that up to see where that was. And then we used to go up to Philadelphia for a weekend. But Philadelphia was a bad place to go on Sunday to find a restaurant to eat. Everything was closed up. And let's see, what else was there?
What about the uniforms? Did you have to buy your own uniforms?
No, the uniforms was given to us and all. And was at Fort Monroe, I made PFC. And then when I got to Bowling Field, I made Corporal. And in well, at Bowling Field, I worked in supply, and my first Christmas away from home, I spent in the hospital. Of course, Christmas morning, from the children and from different Sunday schools and schools, they had made things, and when we woke up on Christmas morning, there was always something on the foot of our bed, you know, and they'd have a stocking made, or there'd be with candy in it or something. And
I imagine you found Washington, D.C. to be quite different from South Dakota.
oh yes.
And did you
I like the
find-
big cities. I never
did.
cared to go to California. Some of the girls went to California from Fort Monroe, but I never cared for the West Coast. I always thought the East Coast was best. I don't know why. Just exciting, because being from a small town and everything, I think.
Yeah. And did you, I was going to ask, I can't remember either, but I was going to ask you.
Did you encounter any discrimination from the men?
No.
You were
No,
treated fair
we were
and
treated
square?
good. Yeah, we were treated good. They weren't jealous of us or anything like that. No.
Did you do any bivouacking out in the field with tents and...
No, we didn't do any camping out or anything like that. They, well, going back to Fort Monroe there, one time they took us out. They had blown them dynamite up, and they took us out to show us the big hole that it left. And then I think we ate out that day. And of course, again, the non-com would say, you're going to eat with us, but us two girls always had to eat with the officers. And
So you did office work there as well, or not?
not at Bowling Field. I didn't, no, it was in supply, handing out supply and checking it.
Do you remember the first plane ride, I suppose? Was that for basic training, or?
Well, it was,
You mentioned-
no, my first plane ride was out home. There was a plane that come to the little town of Egan, and you could ride, I don't know, it was a couple dollars they charged. Somebody had a small plane, and I took my youngest sister with me, and she wasn't supposed to go up in the plane, but I got her to go up with me. And we just circled around, come back down. When we got home, my mother said, Grace, you went up in that plane, because she was still white as a sheet.
So you
But-
were the adventuresome.
So I was the one to adventure, huh? But we used to go up when they fixed the airplanes and everything. And
So you were happy to get onto an Army base, or Air Force base?
yeah, I enjoyed that.
And that was
And
your
then
dream.
I had a cousin that lived in Washington, and I used to see her and have her come visit me on the base and everything. And I know at Fort Monroe one time there was two girls, they were twins, and we took a boat trip up to Washington from Fort Monroe. And then we spent the weekend with this cousin of mine, and then we took the boat back. But
During that period of time, many of the people in the United States during the war years had a lot of shortages. Can you recall in your visits into the cities what it was like? Were there blackouts there? Did you see air raid wardens around? How was the food supply? Did you have to
No,
furnish stamps or so to
No,
be able to
there
get
was-
things?
nothing like that. Our mail was free. We just write free up in the corner.
No, I meant the food stamps, the food
Oh.
tokens.
Food stamps,
Or
no.
the people in the
No, I
cities?
didn't see anything of that. And
No rationing of gasoline, or?
there probably was at home, I don't know. I know cigarettes were hard to get, and we could get them. And I forget how much they were, and I'd get them, send them home to my father. And they had covered candy, and we got that 50 cents a box. And I used to get several boxes of that, send them home to my mother and sisters, wrap them up with the cigarettes and mail them. I was
Oh,
always
did-
sending my folks cigarettes and boxes of candy.
Now, did they experience the shortages then instead?
I think sugar was ration,
Mhm.
because it seems to me we got some. Did we get sugars? Seems to me we got something in service.
Mhm.
I won't say for sure though. Maybe it was after I got out or something.
Yeah.
But
So then, why did you leave the service after 2 years?
well, I had signed up to go overseas, and after I'd signed up, why, the war was over with. So I decided I'd get out of service and go back home. And so I did.
Were you part of any of the celebrations when the war ended, or what was it like at that time?
No, not really.
They didn't do much
No.
celebration where you were.
Mm.
And back home, it was probably fairly
No.
quiet.
Probably in Sioux Falls, but we were about 40 miles north of Sioux Falls.
Mm-hmm. So you were.
And I don't.
So then you left because the war was over. Now, did the experience you had in the military help you in getting a job when you got out, or how did
Well,
it change your life?
I had gotten notice that I had a job in Minneapolis, but instead of that, I came back to Albany, and then I got a job at Millstein glove factory when they were in business. Well, the first one I got was the Babbitt Company. They had made Babel, was it? The Babbitt.
Mm-hmm.
And then
And that was in Albany?
in Albany,
Really?
down at the south end. And then I worked in the Millstein glove factory.
Now the
Where
glove
they
factory was in
Where they
Albany
made gloves, yeah.
also.
I worked in the office there,
Okay.
answering the phone. And
All right. And then how many years did you stay in that job? For many years till you retired?
well, I
or-
stayed there. Yeah. I don't have to say I was married before I got out of service, do I?
No.
No. Well, I was married. When I come to Albany, this fellow that I met in Pierre, his family introduced me to a fella. And so I'd come up and see, when I come up to visit his folks, why, we'd always get together, his sisters and this fellow they introduced me to. So we ended up getting married. And then, of course, when I got out of service, I had to go back to Des Moines. And then I went home. Well, then I packed up some things and came back to Albany. But within a year, I had annulment. And I was working in Millstein glove factory at the time. And a couple years later, I was introduced to my husband. He was from Albany here. And he was in service, but he was a civilian working over in England. But he had, same thing with the service, he had his number and he go by his, he couldn't get out, anything like we could. And we couldn't give him our serial number, and that's the way he had to do too.
Mhm.
And I was introduced to him, and then I just stayed in Albany.
Mhm.
But then we had 3 children, and I always said my grandmother was born in Vermont. Some of her family was born in Vermont, and some in New York. And they traveled by covered wagon to South Dakota. And I said, well, I come from South Dakota to New York by airplane and train.
That's how times change.
Uh-huh.
And so, how, being in the military, I know you volunteer here at the Stratton VA Medical Center.
Yeah,
How did it influence you?
well, I didn't. With the 3 children, I really didn't go back to work until they were kind of all in school. And I worked in the North Colony School in the food department. And then when I retired from the school, I decided I wanted something volunteer. And I figured as long as I was a veteran, I'd go to the VA and volunteer. And I volunteered here 19 years. And I'm kind of thinking now to give it up.
And what kind of work have you done here through the years?
Well, I've just worked in escort because I was still working in the school, and whoever called me first, if the school didn't call me, I'd be ready to come here. And if they called me to come into work, if somebody was out and I volunteered or went into work to substitute, then I'd go to school. So I was, first couple of years I was working and volunteering here both. And then finally when I did retired from the school, why I just volunteer. I used to come in 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. And then I've cut it down. Well, since February, I've cut it down more, and I'm on the verge of giving it up now.
Mm-hmm.
So, but I've enjoyed it. I met a lot of people, and you know.
And maybe you want to explain what escort service is for those who
what?
don't. You could explain what escort service is for those who don't know.
Well, at the VA, I signed up for escort because you could go in, put in as many hours as you want, or any day that you want. And I used to come in 5 days a week for 7 hours, 8 hours a day. And when I first started, they had girls that were paid, and of course the rest of us were all volunteers. But in the last several years, I don't know, 6 or something, maybe longer than that, they took the paid girls out and gave them other jobs, which they are still in the VA here because I see them now and then. So the escort is all volunteer, and they can always use volunteers for escort in the afternoons. But when escort, we get calls from the different floors to come and get a patient. They'll be in wheelchairs, and we have to take them for their appointments. Some of the patients walk, and some of the patients might be blind, and you have to take their arm to take them to wherever their appointment is. And then, of course, when they get through with their appointment, they call escort again, and somebody will go down to get them. So you have several trips. One day I think I made 51 or 52 trips because there wasn't that many people here. Well, that's when I was a little younger and could go a little faster. And some of the volunteers would think I was lying. And Helen that sat at the desk, she said, yes, she did. She'd always shake her head, yes.
Yeah. You find those wheelchairs aren't too easy to push up ramps.
You get some of the wheelchairs, you get a heavy person in some of those wheelchairs. They're a little hard to push.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Now,
But I've enjoyed it.
Now, because you're a veteran yourself, have you ever had any opportunity to come to the VA for any assistance medical-wise?
I did for a while, yes. I came for a while. And then, I don't know just what happened, why I went back to another doctor and all. But I had a lot of friends that came here for doctors. But no, when I came for medical treatment, it was all right. I had no trouble, but I don't know just why. I just went to a doctor, I guess, away from the hospital, and I just got used to it.
And have you been in touch with any people that you ever met in the service?
Well, when I come to Albany here, I went to some kind of a meeting. It seems to me it was a Air Force meeting, and I met a couple girls, and we got together and decided we'd start American Legion Post, all women. And so I'm a charter member, excuse me, a charter member of the Tamara Post 1708. You might have heard of it. And we had quite a few girls, say 60, around 60 or so. And then, of course, some of them moved away. Some of them were still in service. And one of the girls that's from Vermont, she was stationed at Bowling Field with me when I was. And she come to Albany when she got out, so we kept in touch and got together. And So we got together one time and we formed this Legion post, all women. Of course, they still called us auxiliary. They always called us an auxiliary, and we said, no, we're not an auxiliary, we're a Legion post, all women. And we used to go out for dinners, and we had bingo parties, and we used to buy a row of seats in the old Palace Theater when they had a movie we wanted to go to. We'd go down and buy, they'd get so many seats, and then we'd pay for them, and we'd all go together to a movie. And we used to go up to there was an Oxford, New York, visit the patients up there.
Mhm.
And then we used to go up to
Mount McGregor.
pardon?
Mount McGregor.
No,
Saranac Lake,
no,
Another home.
Sunmount.
no, I can't think of it. No. But we'd go to Oxford, visit patients, because a couple of our girls always said if they had to go someplace, they'd go to Oxford, but as it turned out, they never did. But then we used to have picnics. We'd go out to different houses of the girls and have a picnic, cookout. And of course, some of the girls would attend state and national conventions. And after 50 years, we had a dinner, celebrated 50 years, and had some of the county officers. And we closed our post, and most of the girls transferred to a men's post, and I did too. I'm still active in the Legion. And we meet, well, we'll be going back to our meetings in September, because the national convention's going on now, if it isn't over with. And so I'm the
You're an officer.
I was going to say what office I held, chaplain of Silverstein Post. And I transferred to Silverstein Post, and a couple of the other girls did too. But through the years, since we closed the post, most of the girls have passed on.
Mhm.
And I'd just seen the paper, I picked it up in Escort this morning, one has passed, she passed away here Sunday. And of course, I keep in touch. I just called two the other day, and we kind of keep in touch. Maybe a couple times a year we'll call. And there's one up in Fonda that I always hear from at Christmas time. And I think there's just the three of us that keep in touch now, because the rest of them have all passed away.
Now, joining the men's post, did you see a little bit different
No,
atmosphere?
not really. No,
And
they
they
took us
accepted
in, and it seems like, well, after we started our Legion post, there was a couple men from Columbia County. They used to come up, and they'd do more things for our post, of volunteer and everything. And they always, I don't know, they seemed to like the post and everything. And, we had an auxiliary of the post too. Men's auxiliary
Yeah, I
of the
was
post.
wondering.
Yeah, we had a men's auxiliary, so it was $1 a year, and we used the money for child welfare. And at Christmas time, Tamara Post used to go out. We'd maybe get, through a school, we'd get a family that a child needed something. We'd take them out and buy them clothes for Christmas. And then we'd always get a family, maybe a turkey and things to go with it for a Christmas dinner. And maybe we'd get for a couple families that way.
Then I suppose you also did things for the hospital here? It seems like many of them do.
We used to, when we first started our post, we used to come visit the women veterans and give them canteen books. And and then as we got older, we kind of did away with that too. But we were active in coming to visit the women veterans.
Well, it sounds like you've had a very rewarding life.
Yeah, I've enjoyed it.
Yeah.
Well, coming here I could have gone to Memorial Hospital, But being a veteran, I came to the VA here to volunteer.
Well, that's good.
And I've enjoyed it all these years, but as I say, this past, well, since March, I haven't been too well. I've been in the hospital, and I don't know, I've got a heart that goes faster than it should. I think that's why by noon.
It's trying to keep you going to do all this
and I
work.
forget about it, you know, and I'm used to going. That when I first volunteered, Helen, the girls in there, Verla, slow down, and I still think I can go, and I forget. And I think that's why about after 4 hours escorting, I get a little dizzy. That's the way I feel dizzy now. So, but as I say, a lot of things I get to talk and then my mind's blank. I can't think of what I'm saying or words or something. So I hope this has helped you and all.
Yeah, well, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
And I don't know if you
visiting
want to look through any of these.